All right. So we've spent a lot of time covering Git, the program for version control. Now we're going to talk more about GitHub, which is the company that's sort of become the standard and sort of like the social network for developers where, all right, great, I've written code, it's in a Git repository. How do I collaborate with other people on it? How do I share my code with the world or add it to my portfolio? And how do I back it up? And GitHub is the answer to that question. And everything we've been doing is on what's called a local Git repository because it's on my computer. And we're going to see now how to connect it to a remote Git repository, which is just a fancy word for a Git repo on another computer, which in this case will be on GitHub server. So we're going to talk just a little bit about GitHub. We're going to walk through creating a brand new repository. We're going to see how to connect a local repository to one that already exists on GitHub. We're going to see how to send code from my computer to GitHub, how to deal with branches to get like my different branches onto GitHub. We're going to see a little bit of collaboration with pull requests, which relates to merging. And then we'll see how, if I'm working with someone and they've pushed up some code to GitHub, how do I grab that code? How do I sync my local Git repo with the remote? So let's go ahead and dive on in. I'm just going to go ahead and make a repository. I'm going to do this in the Platoon workspace, in the GitHub workspace. And if I go here to repositories, there's this new repository button, and we're just going to call it Buffalo Git Fundamentals. And we'll add a description. And there's a number of different configuration options. You can add a readme.md markdown file by default or not. You can add a git ignore file to ignore certain kinds of files. You can add different kinds of open source licenses. You can choose if the repository is only visible to people who you ask to join it, other GitHub users or people in a GitHub org, or if it's visible to the world. We're just going to leave it to internal. And I'm just going to go ahead and create basically an empty repository. And we see a bunch of things here. But most importantly, we see this URL here, right? And we see Git has given us some commands. If I want to create a new repo and connect the two, and so on. And so that's what we're actually going to do is set up a connection between the local repo we already made and this one that exists. And let me give us a little more real estate here. We'll kind of leave this up here because we'll need this in a minute. So one thing that a Git repository keeps track of is what's called remotes. And if I use this command git remote -v, and by the way, this is good to know. You don't need to do this all the time. I think for assignments, we have a different workflow. So the goal of this right now is more to understand how Git repos talk to each other, less so than something you're going to do all the time. So this git remote -v command prints out information about other Git repositories that this one is connected to. And right now, there's none. So what we need to do is we need to add another Git repository that my local one can talk to. And in this case, it's going to be this one that we just created. And they give us a really handy dandy command to do that for us. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and I'll walk through what the command does. And let's get a little more screen real estate here and paste it in. So there's a couple things going on here. We see hopefully everyone can see my little red annotator right here. We see we're using the git remote command. and we're using this command add. So we're going to add a remote repo for my local repo to talk to. This is the nickname of the remote repo. It's going to be named origin, and origin by convention has sort of a special meaning. And that means this is the official source of truth for this project, right? So we could all be collaborating and we would all add as origin the remote repo up on GitHub. And that would be sort of our collective source of truth as a team. This nickname could be whatever we want. If for some reason I needed multiple remotes, it might be something other than origin. When working with GitHub, the convention is GitHub is the origin. After here, we give, if this is the name in my phone book, this is the phone number, right? This is the URL in a special format for this specific repository. And we see here the GitHub org and then the name of the GitHub repo. So for you, this might be your GitHub username and then the repo name. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And now if I do git remote -v, we see here that we've added some information about a remote repository named origin, and we have a URL for it. And note that there's two different ones. Fetch is to grab information from it, and push is to push information to it. And I do want to pause and check in here and see if folks have any questions. All right. Oh, Alex, yes, sir.
What does get remote -v display again? What kind of info?
It displays the information for any remote repositories where it's basically the addresses of other repositories we can send code to or get code from. So it's like the address book for my repo, if that makes sense.
Got it. The address book for your repo, I guess for the Git repo locally.
Exactly. 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 Right. So we almost always just have one for GitHub, but in order for me to send code from my local repo to some remote repo, we need to have that information. And so git remote v shows like what we've configured. And that's why when I ran it before, it was empty because we hadn't set up anything at all. When you clone a repository from GitHub or fork one, it sets this up automatically as part of that process. Tom. Yeah, good question. Tom, yes, sir.
I think you started to answer my question with the last bit of that. I was about to say, is this get remote add? This is for an existing local repository, but what if we create the GitHub repository first and we don't have a local one yet? Is the process the same or is it going to be different?
Yeah, great question. Let's actually see this in action real quick. So let me just go here and just grab some random repository. And we have here some code that we've been working on. I'm going to clone it. If we were going to fork it, the process would be the same. Let me open up another shell session so I can do this somewhere else. And let's put it just here. So git clone. Note that a couple things have happened. It created a directory for us that has the same name as the repo. If I navigate into that directory, I see all this code. And most importantly, there's that .git directory, right? And if I do git remote -v, we see that the origins are already set up. So the clone command does all that work for us. Yeah, great question. That's the nice part about cloning and forking. All right. Now that we've got, so this is really for like, I want to connect a local repo I already have to another one on GitHub. And now that we've connected them, let's see how I can push code from one to the other. So push means I'm sending code from one repository to another. And so let me just go ahead and type git push. and we get a really interesting message here. At first glance, this message looks like an error message, but it's actually really normal. So don't get afraid because it says fatal. And if we read it, what we see is it says the current main branch has no upstream branch. Upstream here means the origin, like the source of the river. So we need to tell the branch what remote to connect to. And in fact, on that remote, we need to create that branch. This GitHub repo here has no branches right now. It has nothing, right? So Git tells us to push the current branch and set the remote as upstream for this branch. Run this command, git push with this set upstream flag. So you see this all the time, especially when making new branches. I just use git push and then I copy and paste what they give me and I run it. And we see here some sort of statistical information about commits and pushing. We see writing, we see remote, we see where it's been sent, we see it's made a new branch, and we see Git now knows, hey, for main branch, if I push, it should go to this remote, to GitHub. And now if I go back over here and refresh the page, we see that I've got my code and we have a main branch. So again, seeing that message is really normal. Let's say I check out the My Feature branch and I want to push that work there. Well, because the remote doesn't have a My Feature branch and we haven't told Git what is sort of the main remote to use for My Feature when we push, because Git is crazy configurable, we have to do the same thing again. And that's totally okay. And this is exactly my workflow. If I'm on a new branch, I'll just type git push. It'll say this message, and then I just copy and paste this thing and push it. And now if I do make a change, like let's add a README. So I'm cheating a little bit because I'm putting this on an existing branch, but that's okay. Now if I type git push, it pushes it just fine. And in fact, over here on GitHub, it tells us the My Feature branch had some recent pushes. And over here, I can look at the different branches. I just need to refresh the page. And now we have My Feature branch. And here we can see the README on My Feature branch and the other changes. So it's a pretty similar workflow for different branches. And the pushing is fairly straightforward. Now we've seen merging. Let's see sort of the next level of merging. So GitHub lets us make something called a pull request. And this is sort of unique to GitHub. This isn't really about Git. And in fact, we see this message up here that says, hey, this My Feature branch, it has something main doesn't. Do we want to make a pull request? So the easy way to do it is to just click this button. Let me show you guys the manual way just to kind of dig into the process a bit. We choose the main branch or the base branch that we're going to merge onto. We choose the target branch that has the change we want to merge. Now, this is really important. This create pull request button is 100% safe. 100% safe. We're not merging anything. This is just a request to merge. So I'm going to create this pull request. You can add different people as reviewers. You can add labels. There's all sorts of organization that happens around this. And I'll show you all a real world example in a moment. We can see the commits on this branch that aren't on main. Right? The same thing we saw on the command line, but more visually. We can see files changed. If we're collaborating, someone could add a comment and say, is this right? Should it actually be XYZ? right? So this is this is really how code reviews happen on software engineering teams. Someone else might say like, great job. And there could be a lot of discussion here. And then as a junior engineer, once I've gotten this pull request approved, and someone says something like, looks good to me, merge it. This merge button is the same as the git merge command that we were doing on the command line. Right? So this, I think, to answer some of the questions of how do you protect the main branch that people were asking earlier, like this is a huge part of how software development teams collaborate. Right? And in GitHub, you can set a lot of controls around pull requests and when they can or cannot be merged. And so now we're going to merge this pull request. And if I look at pull requests and the history here, we see there's one closed before it was open. And if I go here on the main branch, we see the readmes there. GitHub nicely shows the readme. If we look at our commit history, we can, sorry, let's look at all the commits. We can see the history of all those commits. And so this pull request is like the key collaboration tool for software developers. And just to show an example of this, let's again go to the React GitHub repository for the React.js framework. And if we look at the pull requests here, we see there's a lot of these. Here's one by the React core team. You can in fact see these get connected to issues where you can describe tasks, though they didn't do a great job of describing this one. And you can see that some sort of bot has added information, but you can see there's a lot of back and forth discussion here in the review process. There's automatic tests that were run. If we look for maybe a pull request, let's maybe sort it by most commented. So here we a bit more of a formal pull request, and this is pretty common, describing what it is, describing how a reviewer can test it. And then we see there's just a whole bunch of discussion around whatever this feature is. And so in group projects or whenever you're collaborating using GitHub, using branches and pull requests this way is sort of the standard. The last piece of the puzzle here, and then I think it'll be a good time to pause for questions, is how do I get changes from GitHub onto my local repo? Because if I go back to our Buffalo Git fundamentals, well, I merged this stuff to main. And if I look at the commit history on main, it's got this README, right? But if I look at the main branch for the same repo on my computer, let's check out main, and I use git log, I don't have that, right? This is an older merge, and we don't have the create README. There's no automatic syncing between branches on a local repo and GitHub on a remote. And so just like I pushed from my local repo to GitHub, I run the command git pull. And this is specific to whatever branch I'm on. And so what I've done now is I've pulled down any changes to the main branch from the remote origin. And we see here this README. And now if I type git log, we see that we have those more recent commits, right? The merge commit for the README and then the one for the README itself. And then here's the README right here. And so when you're collaborating, git pull is really important, and that's how you grab changes. For instance, if I checked out the my feature branch, I can run git pull and it says already up to date because there's no changes, right? Git fetch is useful. It will check if there's branches that exist on the remote that you don't have, and it will just get the branch names, but it does not actually pull down commits. And I think now is a good time to take questions. I do just want to point out really quickly a couple resources we have, and then we'll take some questions. So if I scroll down to the bottom of the written curriculum for this part 2 of today's lesson, so this does walk through all of these things. And then we have a little cheat sheet right here. And again, just a little bit of advice. And there's a couple really good cheat sheet tools right here. Let me just point these out so that you guys know they exist. So we have I think it's that same intermediate Git doc that we have. And then we have let's see. I apologize, that one's a dead link. We'll have to fix that one. Yeah, all right, let's pause. Let's take some questions. Alex, yes, sir.
So git pull is what you would use once you already clone, or are they somewhat similar? Are you just, I guess cloning's less efficient?
So if you write some code and it's on your Git repository, and then I clone your repository so we can collaborate, then you write some more code and you push it up to the Git repository on GitHub. How do I get your new changes? And the answer to that question is git pull. Clone will get me whatever's already there, but right, there's like a team of 5 or 6 people constantly adding stuff to the repository.
Right. Okay. And if you git clone again, it won't bring the changes.
You would not want to use git clone. And in fact, once you're in a repository, git clone is how you create a Git repo. Like git clone's job is to create a local Git repo, right? Like from GitHub and set up the connections between the two. And as part of that, it'll grab whatever's there. But once that's done, I'm never going to use git clone again. It's the difference between like starting a new project and adding stuff to it, if that makes sense.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, good question. Arnold, yes, sir.
Yeah, so could you clarify git fetch to me?
Let me Google that one actually, because I always get a little confused there. Yeah, git fetch you use less often. Yeah, this is basically what git fetch does. It will, if we're working together and you created a branch and you push that branch up to the GitHub repo, for Arnold's feature, I don't have Arnold's feature branch on my local repo. My Git repo doesn't even know it exists. If I run git fetch, it'll check for any new branches on GitHub, and it will set up the connections. And I think it actually does then run git pull to like grab all the commits. There's a little extra detail around the differences, but it's not worth going into. This is the essence of it. This is like to see what's new, like new branches or like changes to branches.
Okay, so it's just checking if there's any changes, but git pull is more of actually getting the data.
Yeah, git fetch will grab some data, but it's a little more conservative. Normally you're using like git pull to grab down changes to a feature branch. If like there's a new branch that I don't have, I'll use git fetch. If I'm working on a branch and there's a change I need to grab from GitHub, I'll use git pull. Yeah, good question. Chris, yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to confirm. So when you do the GitHub merge, or yeah, when you do the merge on GitHub, um, that that merges those changes onto the main, and then I do git pull on my local. That pulls everything to include the changes, right?
Yeah,
Because it's already on
correct.
the main. And
Yeah.
then for the git fetch, to me that looks like let's say somebody, so on GitHub you do the pull request, right? So say we're commenting on, changes or stuff that needs to be made, then we can fetch that to, like, somebody else could go in and fetch it and make those changes before it gets merged on the main and GitHub.
I think you're confusing two different things. I wouldn't worry about like connecting fetch and main. Um, I think the way to think about like if, in fact, let me actually draw a diagram here. So this is kind of my favorite diagram when it comes to Git. So we've got two things, right? We've got my local repo, and we've got my remote repo. And let's say over here, I've got the my feature branch, and I've done some work here, and I'm going to use git push to send that work up to the remote. And so we've got up on this remote repo on GitHub, we've got the my feature. And now I make a pull request, right? And the pull request doesn't merge anything yet. And over here is main. But when we run the pull, when we hit that merge button that was there in the pull request review, it does git merge my feature, right? And so once we do merge, then we've taken whatever commits are here on my feature and merged them onto main, which is great. Now, this is great. Main has all this nice fancy new stuff. You know, Chris, maybe it's from a feature that you did, and now I want to do more work and I want to get the most recent version of main, right? So in fact, maybe like let's just draw another box and we'll call this main. And we'll call this one is your local repo, and this one is mine. Right, and I've got the main branch too. Now I want to update my main branch to have the changes that are now on GitHub. So I'm going to make sure that, you know, on my local machine, I'm on main branch. And then I'm going to run git pull. And that will pull down those changes on main to my local repo. And then Chris, you'll want to do the same thing because you did your work here on this my feature branch, right? And it's been merged to main, but your main branch is behind. It doesn't have the work that was done here. And because other stuff might have happened to main from other collaborators or things like that, remember that GitHub is the source of truth, right? Because we might have 3 or 4 people working on this. So you're going to want to do the same thing of, you know, making sure you're on the main branch. And again, this is a much more advanced collaboration workflow. We do have an exercise on this today, but we're not going to have to worry about this for a while. And run git pull. And now main on your branch has those most recent changes. Does that help answer your question a bit? Yeah, great question. And again, this is pretty sophisticated. Really for the next several weeks of the course, the focus is going to be on reps and sets with the very basic of Git, which is just commits. Tom, yes, sir.
To go into his question as well as I think he was also asking, and my question as well is, where in this diagram would say a fetch be useful or needed?
Yeah, fetch, I don't want to open the door too much on that
Gotcha.
because yeah, it gets into a little bit more sophisticated behavior around fetch will grab things, but if there's been merges or changes to like a commit history, fetch doesn't grab them when get pull does. So the short answer is in this workflow, fetch is not needed at all. And I think the way to think about it is if you need to get a branch from GitHub that you don't have on your local, you use git fetch, otherwise use git pull.
Is it kind of just like a status update to see if someone else is changing something like, oh yeah, he's working on this now, so I can go ahead and start my work on this, but not
Like I
really
said,
like,
it really is out of scope right now.
gotcha,
I
okay,
can't give it. I think the right answer would be to read up on the docs, but it's gonna open up a rabbit hole.
gotcha, okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. It's just gonna open up a rabbit hole that's too out of scope right now. Arnold, yes, sir.
Yeah, so just to go back in the beginning, this is only possible because we did the git remote add origin and then the URL of the GitHub.
That's
And
correct.
then to pull, that just means pulling from the GitHub back to your main. It basically just merges it so it's up your main gets updated.
That's correct. Yeah, when you use git pull, you're grabbing like any commits here on main branch that you don't have onto your main branch here. And again, git pull is just specific to whatever branch you're currently on, right? So if I was using my feature branch and for some reason there were changes up here, I would check out my feature and then I would run git pull. Cool. I think this is a good stopping point, guys. These are awesome questions. Again, a lot of these questions are pretty advanced, and I want to make sure we're just focusing on like the fundamentals that we're going to be using about 80% of the time with Git. Also because some of the questions get into like more sophisticated behaviors of Git that are just out of scope for right now. But these are all like great questions to be asking. And again, 90% of the time for the assignments, you won't need to be worrying too much about branching. It's really just going to be mainly committing and pushing up to GitHub. Right. And then this collaboration workflow will happen later. Let me go ahead and stop the recording and then let's walk through the assignments. Thank you guys very much.